Shlemiel Crooks by Anna Olswanger, illustrated by Paula Goodman-Coz. In the middle of the night on a Thursday, two crooks, onions should grow in their navels, drove their horse and wagon to the saloon of Reb Elias Olschwanger at the corner of 14th and Carr Streets in St. Louis. This didn't happen yesterday. It was 1919. Reb Elias, you should know, didn't have a sit-down kind of saloon with men coming in to guzzle whiskey. Oh, no. Reb Elias had the kind of saloon with housewives, grandmas even, coming in to buy bottles of wine and brandy, unopened, of course, and strictly kosher, for the Jewish Sabbath. He was the only one in St. Louis selling kosher wines back then. Listen, he also sold kosher cognac. That's a kind of brandy, and mead, which is made out of honey and goes down easy. And for the children, he kept in the back a barrel of pretzels with lots of thick salt on them. Meanwhile, the two crooks, potatoes should sprout in their ears, were stealing crates of Passover wine shipped special that year to Reb Elias on a boat from the land of Israel. Reb Elias paid a little more. Okay, he paid a lot more for that wine. Usually he was buying his Passover stock from the Manischewitz family in Cincinnati. But after Mr. Balfour, Lord Balfour, a big politician in England, promised to make a home for the Jews in the land of Israel, Reb Elias thought maybe they could use the extra business over there. The Jews swatting mosquitoes overseas shouldn't have only watery soup and a little goat's milk to drink. So you won't worry he got his brains knocked out by those lousy crooks. I'll tell you that Reb Elias was sitting at a table in the synagogue 3 blocks down on 11th Street. He was keeping company with Perlmutter, the sailor, Birnbaum, the watchmaker, 6 dry goods men, and 1 ragman. This ragman, I'm pleased to say, later opened up a candy store and stayed put. Reb Elias happened to be the leader of the Talmud Society at the synagogue. Every night he was sitting up late in the study room and sipping hot tea over a page of Talmud. He liked his tea plain, no sugar. That particular night, he was leading a discussion. Okay, maybe it was more like an argument about the first Passover when the Israelites got the boot out of Egypt. Reb Elias was saying in a nice Yiddish that when the Israelites waved goodbye to Pharaoh in the middle of the Red Sea, they weren't exactly standing there empty-handed. They had managed to take a little something in the way of jewelry and clothing from the Egyptians. So over the years, certain people, Reb Elias wasn't mentioning names, kept trying to give the Jews a reputation for being swindlers. By the way, you don't have to thank me, but what I'm giving you here is my personal translation from Reb Elias's Yiddish. And who do you think was worried sick about the Egyptians' reputation? Reb Elias asked Perlmutter, Birnbaum, the 6 dry goods men, and the ragman. I'll tell you, the Israelites. You take a look in the Talmud, you'll see that after a couple 100 years of slave labor, they went asking the Egyptians for a little back pay, in this case, jewelry and clothes. That way, nobody should go around calling the Egyptians slave drivers when it was Pharaoh they should be giving bad names to. Having set the record straight, the Jews were never swindlers, Reb Elias was taking a snooze. Listen, he wasn't exactly a spring chicken. In fact, he was an old man already, past 70. So at 11 o'clock at night, he wouldn't have minded being at home in his bed above Resnick's grocery, a nice feather blanket up to his beard, and Mrs. Olschwanger snoring in her bed next to his. Perlmutter, the tailor, leaned across the table. "You were listening, Birnbaum?" he asked. "You heard Reb Elias say that when the Jews told Pharaoh goodbye, nice knowing you, God let them take a little back pay from the Egyptians. Well, Birnbaum, what do you think the Jews were wandering around in for 40 years? I'll tell you. They were wandering around in nice linen skirts with pleats, very stylish, because they got their back pay in garments." "Garments? Phooey," sputtered Birnbaum, the watchmaker. "You were in the other world, maybe, when Reb Elias told how the Jews got their back pay in jewelry. So for your information, they were wandering around in necklaces and bracelets decorated with diamonds like you see on the face of a lady's nice wristwatch." Reb Elias, meanwhile, was busy sleeping like a log. He wasn't interrupting Perlmutter and Birnbaum. They should only have gone on enjoying themselves. I'll let you in on something. Back when the Israelites were telling Pharaoh they'd be seeing him in the funny papers, you think it was only jewelry and clothing they were loading into saddlebags on camels? You think they weren't packing in a little something to eat on the way? The unleavened bread you probably heard about already, but according to my sources, which I'm keeping confidential, so don't even ask, plenty of dried grapes, okay, raisins, were going into those saddlebags from Pharaoh's own vineyards. How were the Israelites supposed to know they'd end up eating manna from heaven and dragging those raisins around the desert for 40 years? And where do you think the grapes came from that got squashed into the wine shipped to Reb Elias from the land of Israel in 1919? I'll tell you. They came from seeds stuck inside those raisins that got schlepped across the desert. So, you think grape seeds couldn't last all that time? 3,600 years to be exact? What are you, an authority on grapes? Listen, you keep anything dry, it'll last. Ask a pharaoh who's been mummified. Speaking of which, in case you haven't been reading the book of Exodus in the Bible lately, I'll remind you that the Pharaoh who was calling the shots during the first Passover wasn't exactly partial to the Israelites. Never mind, they built him 2 nice cities, Ramses and Pithom, which I'd like to point out nobody today bothers to mention in the same breath with the Jews. Not that I'm complaining, but you think this Pharaoh got finished off when he went chasing after the Israelites into the Red Sea? Ha! Listen to this. In 1919, Pharaoh was still sneaking around trying to pull one over on the Jews. Okay, he wasn't walking around in loose bandages like a mummy you see in the movies. Nobody was getting a good look at him altogether because, in plain words, he was a ghost. And such an operator! He reminded me of my cousin Shlemiel. You turn your back for 1 second, he's putting your cream cheese on rye in his pocket to take home and enjoy, maybe with a sour pickle. So, after more than 3,000 years, this Pharaoh was still sore about losing his Israelite slaves. As soon as he got wind of Reb Elias' special shipment of wine from the land of Israel, he came sniffing around to see if the wine smelt anything like the grapes off his vines. And with Reb Elias' luck, Pharaoh had a good nose. So, what did Pharaoh do? He hot-footed it down to the levee, the part of St. Louis where you wouldn't want to find yourself walking alone at night. He sidled up to a couple of crooks. They already did time in the workhouse for highway robbery. Pharaoh gave a little cough and mentioned to the crooks they should die of heartburn, that it was the middle of the night and nobody was minding Reb Elias Olschwanger's saloon. At first the crooks thought maybe they were hearing a fly buzz near their heads. They swatted at it a time or two and kept on talking about whether they should be betting their money on Pal Moore or Kid Reagan in the bout coming up at the Coliseum. This got Pharaoh mad. Maybe he didn't go in for boxing. And he started calling the crooks some not nice names. Then they got the hint. Hey, one of them said, I've been hanging around a saloon up on 14th Street, giving it the once over. Before he got it out of his mouth good about Reb Elias' special shipment of Passover wine, the second crook was already out the door. His teeth should fall out, except one, then he could have a toothache. You know what they say, a lock is only for honest men. So don't look surprised when I tell you that a big chisel and hammer was sliding around the floor of the wagon the crooks hitched up to their horse. Those two lowlifes cut through the chain on Reb Elias' saloon door like it was made out of straw. And the next thing you know, they were dragging his crates of Passover wine out to the sidewalk. What a sorrow! Do you know what happens if Jews don't have wine at the Seder, the name the Passover meal goes by? I'll tell you. It means they don't get to fill up a wine glass, especially for the prophet Elijah, that he should take a sip on his way to all the other Seders. Elijah, by the way, is like Pharaoh in that you can't see him exactly. Not to mention, he's capable of packing in a lot of wine. Also, he moves faster than my cousin Shloim. Well, no wine, no prophet Elijah. And in case you haven't been reading the book of Malachi either, Elijah is the one with the job of announcing the Messiah. So what if the Messiah had decided to come that Passover in 1919? The Jews of St. Louis wouldn't have known to start packing their things and make like crazy to the Anchor Line steamship office to buy a one-way ticket to the land of Israel. Gewalt. Okay, those crooks, a trolley car should grow in their stomachs, were about to load Reb Elias' crates of wine into their wagon. Their horse was minding his own business, dreaming about some nice oats maybe, when he happened to get an eyeful of those bums standing over Reb Elias' wine. Maybe the horse felt put out. He wasn't getting a cut of the loot. Who knows? So in English, even, plain like the nose on your face, he let out with, "Crooks, crooks!" Well, the two crooks gave a look to the horse and then to each other, and not being exactly overstocked in the brains department, figured maybe the horse was letting out with a burp. Besides, who ever heard of a talking horse? Well, excuse me, but maybe the horses those crooks were used to being around just never had anything to say. Also, you should know that the prophet Elijah wasn't standing around this whole time twiddling his thumbs. Maybe he put the horse up to it. You think only Pharaoh knew how to play a little dirty? The bottom line was those crooks with sauerkraut for brains went on about their business of loading Reb Elias's wine into their wagon. Never mind they had on their hands a talking horse. By this time, Mankel, who lived above Reb Elias's saloon, was sitting up in his bed and wondering what kind of shtus was going on outside. He kept hearing somebody with a little indigestion call out, "Crooks, Crooks!" When Mankel opened his window and saw Reb Elias's crates of Passover wine stacked one on top of the other, he let out with a shout you could hear on the other side of St. Louis. "Thieves! Goners! They're robbing my friend Reb Elias Olschwanger! What? They want to take the bread out of an old man's mouth? That kind of aggravation he and his wife, such a nice lady, need? Call the police already! Help! Gewalt!" Mankel would have kept on rattling his tea kettle all night, which is to say he would have kept on yakety-yakking at the top of his lungs, but Resnick across the street opened his window, and as soon as he saw those two rotten eggs about to load Reb Elias's wine into their wagon, he fired his pistol into the air. Hoo-ha! Mrs. Moskowitz, who lived with her little boy next door to Mankel, started screaming like the bedbugs were eating her alive. Let me tell you, a voice like a canary she didn't have. So, with the horse calling out, "Crooks, Crooks!" and Mankel yakety-yakking at the top of his lungs, Resnick shooting his pistol, and Mrs. Moskowitz making like she was dying from the bedbugs, all the people in the neighborhood were soon wide awake and shouting from their windows, "Goners! Gewalt! Goners! Gewalt!" Such a tumult they were making. So what did Pharaoh think the people living around 14th and Carr Streets were going to do when they saw Reb Elias's Passover wine sitting in the middle of the sidewalk? Mind their own business and go back to sleep? Didn't he know that after thousands of years of being without a place to hang their hats, the Jews had learned a thing or two about sticking together? The crooks, it was about time, got scared. How scared? I'll tell you. They ran away like their pants were on fire and left Reb Elias's wine sitting in the middle of the sidewalk, not to mention their horse and wagon in the street. Aha! Those good-for-nothings ended up one horse and wagon poorer, which goes to show that if you spit up in the air, the spit's going to land on your own face. Meanwhile, Reb Elias was walking up Carr Street from the synagogue, wondering what all the commotion in front of his saloon was about. When he got to the corner, he heard the news that he was robbed, but not exactly. He promised Mrs. Moskowitz's little boy a pretzel. He should run down to 11th Street and ask the editor at the Jewish Record, he was up all hours, to print this ad, which I'm nice enough to translate for you into English. Elias Olschwanger wants to thank all his friends on 14th and Carr Streets who stopped the no-good crooks from stealing his wine. Don't worry, he's still got a fine stock of full and half bottles of Land of Israel wine and brandies for Passover. Also, now he's delivering in a horse and wagon. You shouldn't have to come to him, you're so busy. Only in case the Shlemiel Crooks come back for the horse and wagon, you could order now, maybe. Signed E. Olschwanger, Liquor Company, 1028 North 14th Street. So, it shouldn't be a shock. I'm telling you now that those two crooks, worms should hold a wedding in their bellies, were never caught. Not that the police didn't search high and low. Who knows? Maybe Pharaoh did a vanishing act with them, same as my cousin Shlemiel does with my cream cheese on rice sandwiches. Reb Elias got to keep the talking horse. Only afterwards nobody heard it so much as burp. That just proves that a horse doesn't open its mouth unless it's got something to say. I know a few people, they should follow the same advice.